Welcome back, AP. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flip classroom and our continuing discussion of the French Revolution, right? And rather than recording another 35-minute flip, again, my bad, that was an accent, I figured I would go ahead and use one of the flips I recorded last year that's really, really good on the storming of the Bastille and the destruction of that item that's going to lead us straight into the revolution for real, right? So we're going to actually go ahead and clip that video in real fast. And just remember, coming off of last class, that you're going to see the failing Estates General and the tennis court oath lead directly to this aggressive action by this new National Assembly party that's going to then send France into a revolution that will send ripple effects throughout European history for over 100 years to follow, right? But we'll talk about that some more when I see y'all in class. Y'all have a good one. But we do know that it was some type of jab out of either fear or disrespect, right? Now, the big thing, though, is that this giant group of Third Estate members starts roaming through the hallways. This now double the size in, representatives group of Third Estate members are roaming the hallways of Versailles trying to find a large enough room for them to meet in. And what they find is a tennis court. And at that tennis court, some historians argue that the revolution began in that moment, right? Because these men got together in the middle of that tennis court and they vowed to one another that they would not separate as the National Assembly unless their demands were met, right? So, they would not separate until things changed. They would not separate until tax law was changed. They would not separate until they had rights and a constitution and personal liberties and everything else. And here is one of the most unique things on the planet when it comes to the tennis court oath. This drawing right here is by an artist named Jacques-Louis David. And if you like art as much as I do, you should definitely start looking up Jacques-Louis David pictures, right? Jacques-Louis David paintings and drawings are the emblematic chain of events and drawings in the progression of order of the French Revolution. He is like the painter of the French Revolution. He painted everything, and he's got so many fantastic pieces, right? So this, though, one being one of the tennis court oath, right? Now, look what he did. Look what he did in the tennis court picture. He's got a member of the Third Estate in their black robe, a member of the First Estate in their ceremonial clergy garb, and then a member of the Second Estate in their noble regalia, coming together, asking for equality, and shaking hands and embracing one another. Woo! This is a very big moment. We've got members of every estate demonstrating in the National Assembly that they are ready to unite. Except this guy, who looks like he's having a really, really bad day. It looks like he's just I just want to go home. Now, the big thing, though, is also there is a painting much like this one at the formation of the American government, right? This famous painting is, of course, when the Declaration of Independence was signed. Look how boring that is, right? So, it is absolutely ridiculous because you've got, this whole thing where it's yes, Gerald, bring the saltine crackers in. And then, Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin are just oh, Declaration of Independence. Cool, right? And then you've got this, right? It's just being and then, tell me this doesn't look like a rave. Tell me this does not look like an absolute party. You literally zoomed in and you've got all these people dancing. Hanging from the rafters up here, all while this techno music is blaring in the background. Look at all this stuff going on. You've got these guys who still have a bad time. And then you've got this dude over here, just what the heck is this guy doing? He's just rubbing his chest and screaming out. This guy's praying and convulsing. Everyone's having a big moment. It's kind of emblematic of the direction that the French Revolution would go. Okay, cut the music. All right, so of the French Revolution would go, and it would become much more of a, not hysteric, but a kind of intense, very, very viable, very crazy, over-the-top event, right? And so obviously, as you can tell with the tennis court oath occurring, I know I said I wasn't going to add anything, but I couldn't help myself. As you can tell with the tennis court oath occurring, the Estates General has failed, right? So, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The Estates General is done, right? So, the Estates General is over. It might as well just call it quits because you've got the Third Estate saying, we're not the Third Estate anymore, right? So where do you go when you start having these meetings? It's very obvious that this thing is failing miserably. And something very important happens. Louis XVI, McKenna, don't freak out, all right? So, but Louis XVI, in response to the tennis court oath, fired Jacques Necker
and blamed it on him. The people of France are now furious, right? So, they're furious because they thought that he was sympathetic to the Third Estate, and they're angry, and word spreads like a rumor at a high school, and down the grapevine it goes until we get to this ridiculous event that I'm going to try to not scream about because I love it so much. All right, so anyway, now, the storming of the Bastille is probably one of the most significant events in Western civilization's history, period. Right? So, and I mean that, in a big way, because it's going to be the very first time that a group of people, regular people, arm themselves and begin to attack their government in a significant revolutionary way. Not that hadn't happened before, because it had happened before, but in a revolutionary way that a wave would just surge through France and start their revolution, right? So, the big thing that you have to really understand going into this, though, is some people make the argument that the revolution started at the tennis court because then, of course, this happened because of the tennis court oath, and some people argue that it happened at the storming of the Bastille. We'll debate about that a little bit when we get back into class, but the big thing about it, though, is let's chat, okay? So the storming of the Bastille all starts with the fact that Louis relented, and he allowed the National Assembly to exist, right? They had their tennis court oath. They're getting rowdy. He allows them to exist. He allows them to try and have meetings. He allows them to try and go to the Estates General while it's still kind of limping along, even though it's pretty much failed, right? When I put the Estates General failed, it's not like Louis threw his hand up and called it quits on it. He kept trying to do all these stupid little things without, again, exacting any real change, right? However, one big thing he did, though, listening to a large group of those conservative nobles, is he fires Jacques Necker, and he starts moving thousands of troops into Paris, right? Which is such a terrible idea. Because how do you think poor people that are listening to what's going on at the Estates General know because of the press that things are not going well, know that because of the press that nothing is really advancing and that the demands of the Third Estate are not being met, are going to react when they see the military moving around their capital city? They're going to get freaked out, right? That affected their mentality and the mood of the Third Estate, okay? So now when it says right here, how did this affect the mentality and the mood of the Third Estate, not in the estates? That is a really, really confusing sentence. What I mean by that is, how did this movement of troops and things like that affect the mentality of the poor people that weren't at the Estates General, right? So who were not in attendance at the Estates General. Because remember, Versailles is 12 miles outside of Paris, right? So they're starting to freak out. They're starting to panic. And now keep in mind this group of people. They're poor urban workers that are the lowest class in all of French society. They're hungry because a famine has been going on. Prices have been surging. People have been freaking out trying to find food every 5 seconds. So, of course, they're going to get a little aggravated, right? So small groups of soldiers and poor people start quarreling in the streets, right? They start having small skirmishes in the streets and stuff. Now, granted, I'm skipping ahead a little bit because a lot of different stuff happened leading up to those quarrels, right? So, for example, one big thing that happened is the poor stormed a monastery and took 52 wagons of wheat from it. These different troops start moving around and getting sentries located in different areas, possibly preparing to suppress any kind of large gathering of the French or the French people or the urban workers. And then the urban workers grab busts of Jacques Necker and then of this guy named Louis Philippe, the Duke of Orleans. They're we want this guy to be king, screw that guy, we want this dude. And they're storming through the streets and they're marching with these busts held over their head these are the people we want in charge. Louis is the worst, right? And also his wife is the worst. She's Austrian. We don't even like her. And so they're flipping out and they're freaking out. And so there's small skirmishes that happen between groups of soldiers and these urban poor. Now what happens though is because of this, some of these soldiers start flipping sides, right? So I'm not kidding when I say this. So what ended up happening is some of these quarrels lead to some of the soldiers of France that got moved into the capital looking at their weapons and then looking at the poor people and being they're right. I'm a third estate member. Just because I'm a soldier doesn't mean I'm not in the third estate. And members of the military start joining them. And then on top of all of this, the bourgeois sends a call out to all of the people of France being like, we're starting a militia. Just like the Americans did, we're starting a militia. We are starting a group of volunteer men who are ready to come and fight for our cause, right? And guess who organized them? The Marquis de Lafayette. And how did the Marquis de Lafayette have them symbol their involvement in this new National Guard, as he called it? They wore tricolors, right? They wore cockades on their jackets, and that's how you knew you were in the French militia now, the National Guard, right? That was protecting the National Assembly and the national state of things, right? And so that's the birth of the tricolor cockade was in that moment when they would wear it, like on their pins, when they joined the National Guard. And so rumors begin to swirl around that the military is going to be sent in to attack because there's 5,000 troops stationed right outside of Paris. So this sends the people into a frenzy. And they're like, wait a minute, we're a militia now, but we might have 52 wagons of wheat that we can make into bread, which is going to be awesome. And then also those 52 wagons of wheat, this is super cool. They took it to a public market and just gave it out, right? So which is a very, very cool thing. But the other thing about it is but they're looking in their hands and they're like, I have no weapon. What kind of militia am I if I have no weapon to fight with, right? So then they're like, wait a minute, but I know where weapons are stored, right? And they go to this place, right? This beautiful relic that exists to this day in Paris, which is also where Napoleon is buried. Napoleon Bonaparte is buried at this location. And also his horse's skeleton is there, Marengo. It's a very cool military museum now of Paris or of France. And it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful complex. But at the time, what it was called was the Hotel de la Invalides, right? So the Hotel de la Invalides, right? So the Hotel de Invalides becomes the base of operations of this militia for one particular reason. What the Hotel de Invalides is basically a retirement home for military officers of the French military that are too old to fight anymore. So they end up here, right? Now, the people, the soldiers, the former soldiers that are joining the National Guard are like, I know weapons are stored in the Hotel Invalides basement, right? And so they go down into the basement and they storm into this place without basically any opposition at all. And they get down there and they find anywhere from 29,000 to 32,000 muskets. And they're like, yeah, we found guns. But then everybody looks around, they're like, but we don't have bullets or gunpowder. And they're like, ah, we found clubs. Yeah. All right. So the thing that ends up happening though, is they need shot and powder. Right. And so what had happened after some convincing, they find out that the powder and the bullets have been moved to a place called the Bastille, right? Now, what the Bastille is, just a heads up, the Bastille is a medieval fortress, right? It's an old medieval fortress that actually was used to harbor either some of the lamest criminals or some of the worst. For example, Voltaire spent some time in the Bastille. It used to be a medieval fortress that was converted into a prison. And so they had moved the gunpowder, 250 barrels of gunpowder. And granted, it only takes about that much to fire a gun. Now imagine barrels of it, right? So 900 Parisians assemble out front of the Bastille because they know that the gunpowder and the bullets are inside this thing. And this right here is a drawing of what we believe the Bastille looked like. It doesn't exist anymore, and you'll see why. But what happens on July 14th, 1789, 900 men of Paris, all with guns in their hands and no bullets, assemble out front of the Bastille, and they're like, open it up. We know for a fact that the gunpowder and the bullets are in there. Just let us have it and no one gets hurt, right? And the Bastille is being defended not by top-notch French soldiers. It's being defended by 80 invalides, which is older retired military officers. And about 30 Swiss guards, right? And inside of it, there's some prisoners and stuff. And the people outside are threatening, bring the warden out here, negotiate releasing the gunpowder, right? And so what ends up happening is they storm, like they send several representatives in to have negotiations, right? And so what's going down, though, is that basically everything turns upside down whenever, like, basically communications break down, right? And so what ends up going down is a bunch of people, like just storm into the unprotected courtyard on the outside of the Bastille. Shouting ensues. People start freaking out. These representatives are in there with the governor or the warden trying to discuss the release of the prisoners and the release of the gunpowder. And then that takes over an hour, and so the people are restless. And then people start shouting at each other, and they're like, hey, they're not going to give us anything. And then somebody up, one of the guards or Swiss mercenaries, lets a shot off, and then they start shooting at each other. And then, like, literally, apparently, like, 80 or 90 of, like, the stormers died, like, in this moment, and only one of the guards did, mainly because they were propped up on top of a very elevated position. They were pointing cannons at them and stuff, and it's all this other crazy things goes down. And then apparently, like, Abigail Winningham and Morgan Godet, like, climbed up these chains onto a drawbridge and then sawed the drawbridge chains in half, and so the drawbridge came flying down, and it crushed Natalie Sabito, right? So, like, Sabito was just like, oh, no. And then smack, and it just, like, crushed her, and they stormed into it anyway. And then the warden was like, hey, take this note. So the warden slips a note through the cracks in a door and says, look, if you let us all out safely, we'll give you everything inside. They, like, let him out, but then they, like, kill him in the crowd and stab him to death, and they cut his head off and put it on a stick, right? So, like, the revolution is now started, right? Everything turns upside down. The Bastille gets stormed in full force. 98 attackers die. One defender died. And then, like, the revolution has now began, right? So, like, the violent form. Necker gets reinstated. Lafayette leads the National Assembly's National Guard. And this moment is very violent. And the Bastille is no longer there anymore because the Parisians burned it to the ground, right? And to this day, to celebrate the Bastille Day, every single July 4th, they actually have a massive celebration with fireworks and the like and all these other different things inside of Paris. And it's actually really very beautiful. And they, like, launch these fireworks all around the next to the Eiffel Tower and stuff. It's very, very cool. So, like, the storming of the Bastille, though, is a massively important event because now what, right? Like, so now the people have organized a militia. They are now a violent revolutionary group. Now where are we going? Well, we're in it now, all right? So the tricolors have been created. National Guards are ready to go. Lafayette is in charge. Necker is ready to, like, make some change. But you have to understand, this revolution is not going to be short, right? So, like, there is 4 phases to this revolution, right? So you can go ahead and really quick and pause it, and then go ahead and, like, actually jot this down really fast, okay? So go ahead and pause. All right, welcome back real quick. So the big thing about it, though, is the phases of this revolution are very, very intense. From 1789 to 1791, you have what's known as the National Assembly or the liberal phase, right? So these few first years of the revolution are all emblematic of something happens, and then the National Assembly tries to immediately fix it, right? So something will occur, and the National Assembly will have an action of trying to fix it. That's our liberal phase, right? Then from 1792 to 1794, you've got your radical phase, also known as the Reign of Terror, right? So we'll talk about that. A lot of executions, a lot of scary stuff. This is also what I call the guillotine phase, right? So, like, now, so I know Abigail Winningham's like, so now look, the big thing, though, also about it is the 1795 to 1799 phase is the most boring phase on the planet that we spend one slide on. It's called the Directory phase. But then from 1800 to 1815, you have the Napoleonic phase, right? So as you can see, the revolution is very intense. And we're going to talk about one of the very first liberal events, and then we're going to discuss its reaction tomorrow, right? So the big thing that happens, though, is the August Decrees and the Great Fear, okay? So what ends up occurring is literally, apparently, Louis said to one of these conservative members or these conservative nobles when one of them came up to him, and he was like, dude, I heard what happened in Paris. They burned the Bastille down. Is it a riot? And then that noble looked at Louis and said, no, sir, it's a revolution, right? So, like, everybody's flipping out. So Louis hunkers down in Versailles and refuses to leave, right? And so what's going on, though, is that this riot that occurred on July 14th, that revolutionary fervor is starting to spread, right? And it starts to spread into the countryside. And now the rural peasants are getting involved. And the rural peasants are freaking out because they're fearing the fact that the nobles might take their aggression out on them, the serfs. And so the serfs start freaking out and they start rioting in the countryside. They burn feudal contracts. They take back common lands. They destroy enclosures. They burn fields to the ground, which was a bad idea because of a famine. But like they burn anything of value to the nobles. They destroy stuff. They wreck wagons. And then in response to this is going to be a thing called the August Decrees, aka the night of August the 4th. And that is what we're going to be talking about when we get back to class. And I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.